On a cold winter evening, a lonely billionaire named Julian Hart meets a curious little boy who offers friendship instead of pity. What happened next was a life-changing miracle. Julian Hart, a 42-year-old tech billionaire with salt and pepper hair and piercing gray eyes, sat alone in the back seat of his black luxury SUV, his gloved fingers tapping his phone mindlessly. Outside, snow fell gently over the city of Ironbrook, blanketing the pavement in white. Christmas lights blinked across shop windows, but none of it reached his heart. His townhouse sat just a few blocks away, modern, immaculate, but cold as marble. As his driver paused at a red light, Julian's gaze drifted to the sidewalk. That's when he saw him. A small boy, no more than 4, wearing an oversized red hoodie with a rip near the pocket, tugged on the sleeve of a tired-looking woman beside him. The boy had curly dark brown hair, warm caramel skin, and huge, curious eyes that sparkled with life despite the chill. The woman, mid-30s, slim build, medium brown skin, wrapped in a faded green coat, held his hand protectively. Then the boy turned and smiled at Julian through the window. The light changed, but the smile stayed with Julian. Before he could say a word, the little boy ran up to him with outstretched arms and asked brightly, "Hey mister, you look sad, wanna be my friend?" Julian froze. He wasn't sure if it was the sheer innocence of the question, or the way the child smiled like it was the most natural thing in the world. But something cracked in his chest. "I'm Julian," he said softly, kneeling down. "I'm Theo," the boy grinned. "This is my mom, Maggie." The woman looked up, startled, her expression shifting from concern to curiosity. Julian Hart stood stiffly as Maggie pulled herself up from behind the food cart. She was a woman in her mid-30s, with tired but determined eyes. Her medium brown skin was windburned from working outdoors, and her hair, tightly coiled and tucked under a knit beanie, spoke of hurried mornings and cold evenings. She wore an old green coat with missing buttons, and gloves with the fingertips frayed. "Sorry if he bothered you," Maggie said, wiping her hands on a stained apron tied around her waist. "Theo's just friendly." Julian shook his head, looking down at Theo, who was now poking snow with a stick. "He wasn't a bother. I think I needed that." Maggie raised an eyebrow. "You don't look like the kind of man who needs anything." Julian managed a weak smile. "You'd be surprised." They talked for a few minutes. Julian learned that Maggie used to be a head chef in a renowned restaurant until a fire destroyed the kitchen. She lost her job, then her apartment. The cart was a last effort to stay afloat, but it had mechanical issues and needed repairs she couldn't afford. Julian didn't offer money, not yet. Something told him this woman had pride, earned, not stubborn, and wouldn't accept charity. He walked away that evening feeling something strange. Not pity, not guilt, but curiosity. For the first time in years, Julian Hart felt interested in someone else's story. Back in his massive Ironbrook townhouse, Julian moved through rooms that echoed with silence. The polished floors reflected cold moonlight. Artifacts of success, awards, framed headlines, art from his global travels, lined the walls, but none of it felt alive. His kitchen was sleek, stainless, and untouched. He sat at the marble counter, remembering Theo's innocent voice. "Mister, wanna be my friend?" It echoed louder than any investor call or boardroom negotiation. And in that quiet moment, Julian realized just how emotionally malnourished he was. He could buy anything, cars, properties, tech companies. But he hadn't had a real conversation with someone who didn't want something from him in years. He found himself researching portable food cart mechanics, learning about inspection codes, and even how to restart a broken propane line. Not for business, for Maggie, and maybe for himself. 2 days later, Julian returned to the park with a thermos of hot cocoa and a foldable stool under one arm. He wasn't sure what he was doing. He just wanted to be there. Maggie spotted him first. Her expression flickered with surprise, then wariness, then something softer. "You again?" she called out. Julian raised the thermos. "Peace offering." Theo squealed in delight and ran up to him, leaping into a hug. Julian stiffened, but only for a moment. Then, awkwardly, he wrapped his arms around the boy's small frame. "I brought cocoa," Julian said, offering the cup. Maggie narrowed her eyes but accepted it. She took a sip. Her lips curled into a rare smile. "Okay, that's good." Julian shrugged. "It was instant," she smirked. "It's still good." Theo tugged on Julian's coat sleeve. "You want to help fix the cart?" Julian looked at the rusted wheels, cracked frame, and lopsided sign. "Sure," he said. "Why not?" And just like that, the richest man in Ironbrook became an unofficial handyman for a failing food cart. Over the following week, Julian came by daily. Each visit, his layers of detachment peeled back, slowly, subtly. He showed up in designer coats and leather gloves, but soon those were replaced by old hoodies and cheap tool belts Maggie insisted he borrow. Julian had never used a wrench in his life. Now his hands were scraped and smudged with oil. Maggie was skeptical at first. She still didn't know why he came. but each day as he showed up early and left late, always with a joke for Theo or a part for the cart, her defenses dropped. Theo adored Julian. He climbed him like a jungle gym, drew crayon portraits of the three of them together, and insisted Julian help with setting up napkins on the cart's side table. "You ever cook?" Maggie asked one morning, as they crouched beside the propane tank. "Only burnt toast," Julian admitted. "And once very charred eggs," she chuckled, a warm, throaty sound Julian found himself wanting to hear again. "Well," she said, "you're not allowed near my griddle," and just like that they began to form a routine. Maggie cooked a simple lentil stew on the cart's new burner. The smell was rich and inviting. Theo sat nearby, swinging his legs from a folding chair. Julian tasted the dish, his eyes widened. "That's incredible," Maggie grinned with pride. "Family recipe. I used to make it every Sunday before service." "Service? I was a chef," she said. "A good one, before the fire." Julian watched her closely. Her face, framed by wisps of hair escaping her beanie, was calm, but her eyes flickered with sadness. He didn't pry, but he did say, "You're still a chef. This proves it." She looked at him, surprised. Nobody had said that in years. Theo piped up. "Mommy says food is love." Julian nodded. "Then you must love a lot of people." Maggie blinked, her throat tightened. Julian didn't realize it, but that comment healed something inside her. Julian invited them over, casually, not wanting to pressure her. "Just dinner," he said. "You cook, I supervise." Maggie was hesitant. "Your place, you sure?" Theo jumped in. "Do you have cartoons?" Julian smiled. "The best." That night, Maggie entered Julian's pristine kitchen with a mission. She tied on her faded apron and took command like a general. Julian watched her transform. Gone was the cautious woman. In her place was someone alive, confident, precise, radiant. She chopped, stirred, and instructed him to fetch spices and wash vegetables. He followed clumsily, asking dumb questions and laughing at himself. Theo ran through the halls, giddy as smells filled the sterile townhouse with warmth for the first time. Maggie plated the meal, lemon garlic roasted chicken, couscous, and her famous lentil stew. Julian took a bite, his eyes closed. "That's it," he whispered. "That's the warmth I didn't know I missed." Maggie's smile was soft. "That's food made with care." They ate together, not as strangers, but as something closer to a family. Julian hadn't laughed this much in years. After dinner, Theo fell asleep on the couch with a blanket wrapped around him. Maggie stood in Julian's spotless living room, marveling at the sleek modern space that now smelled like roasted garlic and fresh herbs. "This place doesn't look like it's lived in," she said, her arms crossed. She wore the same faded green coat but without the weight of the outside world. Her medium brown skin glowed in the soft lighting. Julian shrugged. "I used to like it that way. Control, order, empty spaces don't hurt you." "Neither do full ones," Maggie replied, her voice quiet. Julian met her eyes. There was a pause, no more banter, no defenses, just the sound of Theo's gentle breathing behind them. Julian looked away first. "I don't have anyone to fill the space." "You do now," she said, and walked over to tuck the blanket tighter around her son. Something changed that night. Neither of them named it, but they both felt it. A week later, as the food cart hummed with new life, an old colleague of Julian's passed by. "Julian Hart," the man said, stopping mid-stride. "You fixing food carts now?" Julian forced a polite smile. "Helping out a friend." The man's eyes flicked to Maggie, who stood inside the cart, her apron dusted with flour, her medium brown skin flushed from the heat. The man gave a tight nod and left without another word. Maggie, however, caught the glance. "Who was that?" "An investor," Julian said. "Not important." "You looked embarrassed." Julian hesitated. "I wasn't, I just didn't expect them to see me here." Maggie stepped out of the cart. "You're not ashamed of this, are you?" He looked into her eyes, then shook his head. "No, I'm more myself here than I ever was in a boardroom." She watched him for a long moment and nodded. "Then don't let people shrink you back into someone you've outgrown." It was the first time someone had challenged Julian to grow toward something meaningful. That night, over reheated stew and store-bought biscuits, Theo asked a question with all the innocence only a 4-year-old could muster. "Julian, are you going to be my daddy?" Maggie choked on her water. Julian sat frozen. Theo looked between them, confused. "You already have dinner with us, and you help fix Mommy's cart. That's what daddies do." Julian didn't speak right away. He looked at Maggie. Her eyes were wide, caught between panic and apology. "I'm just your friend, buddy," Julian said gently. "But I love spending time with you." Theo nodded solemnly. "Okay, but if you were my daddy, I wouldn't mind." He returned to drawing stick figures, 3 of them, holding hands under a big sun. Maggie watched the paper. She didn't say anything, but the tremble in her fingers said enough. The food cart reopened fully 1 week later. Its new name, painted in bold strokes by Maggie herself, read, "Maggie's Honest Spoon." Julian stood beside her as she served the first bowl of her signature stew. Theo handed out napkins, his red hoodie now patched with a smiley face. Julian had sewn himself poorly but proudly. Customers trickled in, drawn by the aromas and the warmth. Local food bloggers wrote about the woman who had risen from hardship to make the best stew in Ironbrook. Julian stood to the side, quietly watching her shine. Maggie was in her element, confident, quick-witted, smiling easily. Her brown eyes sparkled. Her green coat had been replaced with a fresh white apron embroidered with her name. Julian had never seen anything so beautiful. Julian converted one of his unused townhouse rooms into a small kitchen studio for Maggie, just in case weather ruined her outdoor hours. It wasn't charity, it was belief. Maggie hesitated at first, but Theo tugged at her hand and said, "We can call it our rainy day kitchen." Julian had it painted warm yellow. He stocked it with Maggie's favorite spices and even asked for a beginner's cooking lesson himself. She laughed. "You, in an apron?" But the next night, Julian stood beside her, face smeared with flour, apron on backward, stirring sauce with too much focus. Maggie wiped sauce off his cheek. For a brief moment they froze, her hand on his face, his heart pounding, but neither moved. Then Theo burst in with a wooden spoon and declared himself head chef. They all laughed, but the feeling lingered. One quiet evening, as Theo slept in the guest room with stars painted on the ceiling, Julian found Maggie alone on the couch. She held an old photo, a younger version of herself in a chef's coat, arm around another woman. "My sister," she said softly. "She's gone." Julian sat beside her. "I'm sorry. She used to believe in me even when I didn't. When I lost everything, I stopped hearing her voice." Julian gently took the photo. "I think she'd be proud." Maggie nodded. "You think this thing we're building, it's real?" "I do," he whispered. "I haven't felt this real in a long time." She leaned her head on his shoulder. They sat in silence, a fragile kind of peace blooming between them. Local media finally caught on to Maggie's honest spoon. A segment aired on evening news. From chef to street cart hero, Maggie's comeback story. Julian watched from the sidelines during the interview. The reporters asked how she survived the fire, how she rebuilt her life. Maggie said, "I didn't do it alone. People see the cart, the food, but behind it is someone who believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself." When they asked who, Maggie smiled at the camera and said, "A friend." With clean suits and messy hands, Julian felt his chest tighten. He had never wanted to be seen before, but now he was proud of it. After the news aired, Maggie and Julian sat in the kitchen studio sipping tea. "You changed my life," she said simply. "You gave me more than repairs. You gave me room to breathe." Julian didn't respond right away. Then he said, "You gave me a reason to feel again." They stared at each other for a long time, no kiss, no grand gesture, just silence, and the overwhelming sense that something was building, something precious. Theo's 5th birthday arrived. Julian threw him a party, nothing extravagant, just laughter, balloons, and cake Maggie made from scratch. Theo jumped from lap to lap, grinning in his red hoodie, now 2 sizes too small but too sentimental to replace. Julian gave him a tiny chef's hat. "You're my assistant now," Maggie told her son. Julian leaned over. "And who's the boss?" Theo yelled. "Mommy!" The room erupted in laughter. For once, Julian wasn't a guest in his own house. He was family. Julian asked Maggie to expand. "Let's open a real restaurant," he said. "Your name, your menu. I'll fund it. You lead it." Maggie hesitated. "That's a big leap." "I believe in you," he said. "This town needs your food." "I need your food," she smiled. "Then let's cook up a future." The restaurant, still under construction, bore a sign on the glass, "Coming soon, Maggie's Honest Spoon, Kitchen and Heart." Julian, Maggie and Theo stood in front of it taking a photo. Theo asked again, "Now can Julian be my daddy?" This time, Julian looked at Maggie. She smiled. Julian knelt and took Theo's hand. "If you'll have me, little man." Theo nodded hard enough to make his curls bounce. Family wasn't blood, it was built in tiny, honest moments. Months later, the restaurant opened. Laughter, conversation, and the smell of Maggie's stew filled the air. Julian helped in the back, still clumsy with a whisk but proud. Maggie thrived, radiant in her chef's coat again. Theo ran between tables with crayons and jokes. Julian finally felt something money never bought. Belonging. One smile, one child's question, one woman's strength. That's all it took to turn loneliness into love. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more heartwarming stories of unexpected connections and second chances.